In the deep waters off Puerto Rico, a 74-year-old mystery finally solved.
No!
Oh,
Stop!
my God!
Oh my God!
Is that
a plane? That's a plane.
After 74 years on the bottom of the Atlantic, the Pan Am clipper that changed the way you fly has been found. On June 2nd, 2026, a robot dropped into deep water off Puerto Rico. What it found down there is the reason there's a card in your seat pocket and the reason nobody aboard knew what it was for.
Initially, the theory that was proposed by a lot of the media was that the pilot in command committed suicide. But in fact, the accident report clearly stated that the pilot had no history of emotional or physical problems that would preclude suicide, and family, friends, and coworkers said he had no abnormal behavior before the flight.
Isla Grande Airport, San Juan, April 11th, 1952, Good Friday. Sunny, with a light breeze coming in off the harbor. A Douglas DC-4 sits on the ramp with Clipper Endeavour painted on her nose. Pan Am named its airplanes back then the way shipping lines named ships, and the whole fleet flew under the word Clipper. This one was 7 years old and about the size of a modern 737. She had 20,835 hours on the airframe, 4 piston engines, 4 propellers, and no jet anywhere in the picture. The passengers walk out across the concrete and climb the stairs. 64 of them. Puerto Rico, in 1952, is emptying out toward the mainland. A lot of the people boarding that morning are making the trip for the first time in their lives. Some are going to jobs that are already waiting for them. Some are going to family for Easter weekend. The airplane is bound for Idlewild, the New York airport you know now as JFK. That's 1,600 miles, and almost every mile of it is open ocean. 5 crew members board with them. In command is Captain John C. Byrne, seasoned and well-rated. He's exactly the kind of pilot an airline puts on a long overwater run, and by the end of the afternoon, he will have done something most pilots never manage. Flying in 1952 is still a slightly formal event. People dress for it. The cabin crew hand out pillows and blankets and coffee, and they know most of the regulars by name. If you've seen photos of it, it looks calm and expensive and completely under control. And then they close the door. Nobody stands up in that aisle. Nobody holds up a life vest. Nobody walks a single passenger through where the doors are or how the rafts come out. Nobody explains what to do if the ocean ends up on the other side of the window. In 1952, there is no rule anywhere on Earth that says they have to. You buy a ticket, you find your seat, you sit down, and the airplane leaves. Safety is treated as something the crew handles, like the fuel load. It isn't your job to know any of it. At 12:11 in the afternoon, the Clipper Endeavour rolls down the runway and lifts off toward the sea. She gets to 350 feet. Then the number 3 engine quits.
The fact that the signal disappeared, that was the unusual element. The fact that transponder, which was chirping back every time it was hit by the radar beam from air traffic control, went silent.
The crew does everything a crew is trained to do. They feather the dead propeller, turning the blade's edge on so the wind stops dragging on them. They call the tower. They bring the airplane around in a slow turn back toward San Juan. She keeps climbing while they do it, heavy and unhurried, on the 3 engines she has left. This is the exact situation a DC-4 is built to survive. She reaches 550 feet. Then the number 4 engine quits too. Both engines on the right wing are dead now. A loaded DC-4 with one wing gone quiet can't hold altitude, and Byrne knows it inside of a second. He gets on the radio and declares an emergency. He tells the tower he's putting her in the water about 7 miles off Isla Grande. That's not a swimming pool down there. There's a stiff wind running across the surface, and real swell moving underneath it. He tries to buy back a little height first, and that's where the last of his options go. He raises the nose without using every bit of power he still has. The airspeed bleeds away, and the airplane settles lower instead of higher. By the time that's obvious from the cockpit, there's no altitude left to trade for anything. Ditching a big airliner is not a maneuver anybody practices for real, and it almost never goes the way the diagrams promise. You're trying to set 30 tons of aluminum down on a surface that keeps changing shape underneath you, with wings that want to catch a wave and cartwheel the whole thing. Byrne holds her level and gets it right. At 12:20 p.m., the Clipper Endeavour hits the Atlantic. 9 minutes after wheels up. The impact shears the tail off behind the rear bulkhead. The main cabin stays in one piece, right side up, floating. And every single person on board that airplane is alive. Seawater starts coming in through the hole where the tail used to be, and it comes in fast. The cabin crew are on their feet immediately. They have rafts, they have flotation for every person on board. They start moving down the aisle and shouting instructions. They're shouting in English. Most of the faces looking back at them speak Spanish. Nobody in those seats knows where a life vest lives, because nobody has ever told them. The rafts are stowed in compartments the crew is now fighting to open, with the floor going soft underneath. No briefing, no drill, no shared language. 5 people are trying to run an evacuation they have never rehearsed, for 64 passengers who don't know the word for the thing under the seat. Think about what that actually looks like from a middle seat back in the cabin. Water is climbing over your shoes. Somebody in a uniform is yelling something you don't understand and pointing at a wall you have never looked at twice. And through the windows, everybody can see what's waiting out there. Gray water, moving, with nothing on it. The shore is a long way off and looks farther, so people stay in their seats. Investigators asked the survivors what happened in there, and they kept coming back to the same thing. Passengers who could have walked out under their own power held onto the armrests and would not move. The Pan Am Historical Foundation described it about as plainly as anyone could. Most of them stayed glued to their seats. They were more afraid of what was outside the airplane than of the airplane filling up around them. Some of them were probably thinking about sharks. Some were waiting for somebody to tell them it was time. And the crew never got to that part. They were still wrestling with raft compartments and hauling people toward an exit that half the cabin didn't know existed. Every second they spent explaining was a second they weren't spending pulling. There were 5 of them and 64 passengers, and the water was already at the seats. A DC-4 with its tail torn off does not float for long. In under 3 minutes, the Clipper Endeavour rolls over and goes down. She takes most of the people inside her with her. Nobody had told them where the door was. San Juan had Byrne's emergency call before the airplane ever touched the water, and the island moved. A Coast Guard PBY Catalina flying boat under Lieutenant Ted Repulus was in the air within 6 minutes of the alarm. From a phone call to wheels up, in an era with no helicopters and no satellites. The second Catalina was in pieces. She was sitting mid-maintenance with her auxiliary power unit pulled out, and the bilge pump had come out with it. On a flying boat, that's a little like removing the drain plug from a bathtub you're about to sit in. Lieutenant Commander Ken Bilderback looked at the state of her and decided it didn't matter. He was airborne in 10 minutes. The buoy tender Bramble put out from San Juan with medical staff aboard. 2 SA-16 amphibians launched from Ramey Air Force Base at the far northwest corner of the island, and a pair of Air Force pilots up on a training flight had watched the whole thing unfold from above. They started guiding the rescuers straight to the spot. Everybody got there fast. Which means the thing that killed those people had already finished happening by the time help arrived, and it happened inside the cabin. The Catalinas landed in open swell, which is its own kind of insane, and started pulling people out of the water. Bilderback's co-pilot, Lieutenant Commander Jack Natwig, went into the sea himself. He came back with a young boy who wasn't going to make it otherwise. Then Bilderback's airplane turned into the next emergency. He had 15 survivors aboard a flying boat with no pump, and she was taking on the Atlantic by the minute. There was no getting her back into the air. So he brought her alongside the Bramble. They started handing people across one at a time, while the sea got worse around them. They got everybody over except 2 teenagers, which left Bilderback with a choice: abandon a sinking airplane with 2 kids still on board, or taxi her home across open water like a very bad boat. He taxied her home. He ran that half-flooded Catalina all the way in past the walls of El Morro and into San Juan Harbor. By the time he got there, people were standing along the shore cheering him in. 12 passengers and every member of the crew came out of that water alive. 52 people did not. In Puerto Rico, they still call it La Tragedia del Viernes Santo, the Good Friday tragedy. For years afterward, a story went around the island that sharks had taken everyone on board. That tends to happen when the truth is harder to talk about than the rumor. The Civil Aeronautics Board, the agency that eventually became the FAA, took that airplane apart on paper. Taking it apart in person was out of the question. What they found in the maintenance records was ugly. Engine number 3 should have been changed and hadn't been. There were faulty parts inside it. That engine was going to fail on somebody, and it picked the worst altitude on the worst possible morning. They also faulted the way the airplane was handled after the second failure. That nose-up attempt to climb, without using all the power still available, cost the crew the height they needed. In the legal fight that came afterward, Byrne was cleared. Blame settled where the evidence put it, on the maintenance and the parts. Investigators kept circling something that wasn't in any logbook. The ditching worked. A captain with 2 dead engines on one wing had put an airliner into open ocean. He kept every soul aboard alive through the impact, and then almost none of them got out. That airplane didn't kill those people. The minutes after it did, and nothing in any rule book anywhere had prepared one single passenger for those minutes. So the recommendation came down, and it was almost embarrassingly simple. Before flights over water, brief the passengers, show them the exits, show them the flotation and how to put it on. Tell them what to do before anything happens instead of while it's happening. That recommendation is the demonstration you sit through today. It's why somebody points at the doors, holds up a vest, and pulls that little card out of the pocket in front of your knees. It's spread from over-water flights to essentially every commercial flight on the planet, and it has been running on repeat ever since. That demonstration exists, so a stranger in the seat next to you already knows 2 things before anything goes wrong: where the nearest exit is, and that getting up and leaving is what you're supposed to do. Then the story underneath it went missing. A man in San Juan wrote a ballad for the dead and for the men who went in after them, and people sang it for a while. Pan Am put the name Clipper Endeavour back into service on a 707 in 1962, and again on a 727 in 1980. Airlines recycle names, families got older. That rule stayed exactly where it was, and the crash that caused it slid out from under it. And the airplane itself never moved. She sat in water far deeper than anything a diver in 1952 could reach. The whole thing starts with a piece of luggage. In 2019, a man named Russ Matthews read a short news item about a Pan Am baggage tag that had washed ashore on a beach in Florida. It was a few lines long. Most people would have scrolled past it. Matthews runs the Air/Sea Heritage Foundation. Finding lost aircraft and shipwrecks is what he does for a living. He was deep into research on a completely different Pan Am accident when the Clipper Endeavour surfaced in front of him, and what stopped him was how completely it had vanished. An accident had rewritten the first 2 minutes of every commercial flight in the world, and hardly anybody had heard of it. So he started pulling threads: Pan Am's own archives, Coast Guard records, old investigation reports scattered across half a dozen collections that had never been read side by side. He ran surveys off the coast of San Juan and came back with nothing. In 2024, explorer Josh Gates brought Discovery's Expedition Unknown into the search and filmed the hunt for the wreck. That episode aired in October of that year without a wreck in it. What the collaboration did turn up was an address. The Archivo General de Puerto Rico, the island's general archive, held material on the crash that essentially nobody had gone through. Survivor testimony, in their own words. Transcripts of the radio traffic as it was happening. Expert analysis from the hearing. And a chart. Those Air Force pilots who watched the Clipper Endeavour go into the sea had drawn a map of where they saw her hit, so rescuers could find the spot. It had been sitting in a filing box in San Juan since the Truman administration. That map cut the search area down to something a machine could actually cover, which is roughly when the last piece walked in on its own. The research vessel Fugro Brasilis was transiting from Trinidad up toward the Gulf of Mexico. Strapped to her deck was one of the most capable autonomous underwater vehicles on Earth, a Kongsberg Hugin run by a survey outfit called Deep Sea Vision. Its usual job is scanning mineral and gas fields. It swims free with no cable, works down to 20,000 feet, and can stay under for 4 days at a stretch. The ship agreed to stop on the way past. Matthews and Gates got 2 days of her time and not an hour more. That's the entire window for a search that had already eaten 7 years, so they picked their box. If the Air Force chart was wrong, or the currents had moved things, or the drone came back with nothing but sand, the ship was leaving anyway, and the wreck stayed lost for another generation. They sent it down. On June 2nd, 2026, at 7:14 in the evening, on the very first attempt, the sonar drew a fuselage on the sea floor. The photographic survey went down after that, and the pictures came up one at a time. A wing, a tail section, lying apart from everything else, the way a tail lies when it comes off at speed. Then a name, painted on bare aluminum, still readable in the dark. The whole team gasped. What came back was a Douglas DC-4 lying in almost 2,000 feet of water, broken into 2 sections, battered and startlingly intact. Bright aluminum. The winged Pan American logo still on her side. Her name still legible. Decades of salt water had done less damage than anyone expected, and the pictures coming up to the ship were clear enough that there was nothing to argue about. That was her. Nobody is bringing her up. There are no plans to recover the wreck or disturb it in any way, and the reason is simple enough. The people who never got out are still inside her. That site is a grave. Matthews and his foundation are now working with the government of Puerto Rico to expand legal protection around the wreck and to get a memorial built for the people who died there. They have also gone and found the families. That includes the last 2 known living survivors who have spent 74 years carrying that cabin around with them and who finally know where it is. Here's the thing about the safety demonstration you've watched 1,000 times and never once actually watched. It isn't a legal formality, And it isn't a script somebody wrote in an office. It's the testimony of 17 people who came out of the water off San Juan on Good Friday, 1952. It gets read back out loud several thousand times a day all over the world by crews who mostly have no idea whose words they're saying. The Clipper Endeavour is still down there in the dark with her name showing. And somewhere over your head right now, a stranger is holding up a life vest for a cabin full of people who aren't looking up.